So what I'm going to tell you about now is something very much in progress, because of many reasons. So first of all, it's really a progress of building a research corpus that is still ongoing. So digitization, like the scanning, is finished, but there's a lot of improving OCR that is still going on, and it's really just the beginning in that sense. But also the classification, which is the subject of what I'll talk about, is something that we do at every stage of the process. So in the different phases of work. So in a way, it's an essentially in progress talk. What I'm going to, which I'm going to give now. So. To start with, the material that I'll be talking about is made of 4 newspapers, and they are Hebrew newspapers, but it's important to realize that Hebrew in the 19th century is a European language. And so even the one paper, Lebanon, which started in Jerusalem, only lasted 1 year there and had to move to Europe to be printed, and so were the others, as well as Hamagid, which I took the snippets from, and that actually for some time came out in Kraków, although not the period that I'm dealing with in this specific talk, but because the OCR improvement is still ongoing. So this is, for example, the part that is not there yet. I think it's the 90s, the 1890s, when it was there. So these are the newspapers, and I couldn't have done anything without this very large project. We call it JayPress, Jewish Press, which is a historical Jewish press collection of the National Library in Israel and the Tel Aviv University. And I'm sure you know many platforms like this that take historical newspapers and make them accessible, and even OCR them and make them searchable. But you do it with what I call the retrieval paradigm. That the researcher, the traditional researcher or the historian, is searching for a term and can browse and maybe cut the pieces of the corpus that they want to search in, and then they can search in and limit the search according to the year, the geography, and the geography doesn't mean the geography of the subject matter, but where the newspaper came out. And by the title of the newspaper. So very, very general metadata. And then this is what you get in most newspaper historical platforms. This is still a big advancement over the time where you had to go to the archive and actually read the newspapers, of course, but it is still not where the digital humanist would like to be. So of course, the main thing is the OCR, and the OCR is given to us in this XML format that packs the letters of the text and puts them on in specific coordinates on the page, and enables the search and retrieval and finding and representation of the word in the context of the newspaper. And it is a big problem for Hebrew because currently most of the newspapers in JayPress are in a substandard OCR. So substandard is only like relative to now and the capabilities that we have now, and definitely the capabilities we have for other languages. There's still a lot to do with it. So even if we have 1 or 2 errors every line above, and it means that we have 20% error rate for these for the sentences that you see here, there's still smart enough search algorithms that can overcome this and get you to the word that you were searching. But for the kind of research that we were aiming, we needed to improve the OCR. And when we needed to improve the OCR, we had another obstacle, that it would not be good to take all the newspapers and just do the OCR from the start, but because there's a very valuable source of information or level of information that we wanted to keep, and that is the structure. So even today, when we have document analysis algorithms and visual analysis supported by machine learning, this job of segmenting the newspapers and not only identifying, I don't know if you see can you see my mouse? Yeah. So not only identifying the blocks, the different blocks, this is already getting pretty well in the tools that I know, but also knowing that the blocks here are ordered in this order, and they all comprise one article, which is separate than the next one in the page. This is a challenge that, as far as I know right now, is still not really solvable by machine. So what we have here is the machine of the 90s, which is basically outsourcing to India and have Indians do it manually. I think this is what this was the case with these newspapers, and there's so much work that you still cannot reproduce easily that you don't want to throw it away with the OCR, with a bad OCR. So this is why at the Open University, just a moment. At the Open University, we built this pipeline that was meant to take the material from the National Library, from JayPress, the Hebrew newspapers, and move them through this pipeline to make a research corpus out of it. And a research corpus means we keep the segmentation and the logical structure of the articles, but we change the OCR in it, we improve it. We train the model using the software Transcribus. I don't know if it's, you know, but I wonder, do you work with Transcribus? Anybody here worked with Transcribus? Maybe
some of us, yes.
I have worked also, before it started to be like paid.
I'm actually very curious because I'm also consulting on a project that does the history of Lodge and working on a lot of texts. And we also trained a model there, and we didn't find a Polish model, so we were wondering. Okay, and so that was a pipeline, and then the outcome of the pipeline is simple text files, plain text, or TI XML that structures the text according to the logical structure of the name of the newspaper, or the TSV, a tab separated value, so a tabular form, which is what you can see here. This is the corpus as it looks in my Open Refine, another tool that is very worth knowing. And as you can see, this is the span of years that we have. So we have the 4 newspapers. They're very non-uniform regarding the times, not because of the time of publication, but the time of the corpus that we have by now. So we have Hatzfira, which here becomes very frequent because it becomes a daily newspaper. It used to be a weekly, and then the 3 other newspapers here. Basically, the Tzfira started in Warsaw in 1862, but then only started again in 1874. And we have Articles starting with just a few words, which are not really an article. It can be an ad or even a title, or like a separate title for a part of the newspaper. Or it can go as far as 7,700 words. So very diverse material. And I have the Open Refine enables me to work and clean and process the data, the metadata of the newspaper code, the dates and the headlines. And most of what I'll be talking about is what I did working in the lab on after we finished the pipeline. And we wanted to make this corpus into a research corpus. The main thing was, okay, so we can do topic modeling of the newspaper issues from 74 to 1903, let's say, okay? Or we can do some kind of keyword analysis and look for historical phenomena. But if we want to, as historians, many times we would like to have smaller research units that are not like the year or decade or the month or the issue, but a specific section of the paper. So we would want to see, for example, how much is Russia mentioned, or Bismarck or Gladstone are mentioned in the news, or how much they are mentioned in advertisements or in other parts of the newspaper. And that would be very significant to the kind of to our interpretation of the results. So although we have, at the time when I was working on this, other people in the lab were already working on publishing topic modeling and some spatial analysis work on the newspapers, I took it forward in order to see what are the main units, what are the main categories of the newspapers that we could direct research at when it's more evolved. So in order to do that, I use first of all, the clustering algorithms that Open Refine suggests, because the headlines are actually the worst in the sense of OCR, because these are large letters. The OCR fails very often, and there's lots of errors. And when you cluster, you can get like this one headline that appears in so many forms, and you can use the tool of Open Refine to cluster these together. But there's also other clustering. For example, and this is what I did when I started translating the headlines. I can translate Russia to Russia, but there's also a headline that's called Russland. It takes the German form. And then maybe I would like to translate it as Russland, and maybe I would like to cluster them together as Russia. The same with the feuilleton, as you can see here, the feuilleton here, and tavlin, which is sort of tavlin means literally spice, and this is the feuilleton part of a specific newspaper. So I would like to cluster them together if I know that this is indeed the same category. But of course, I don't always know, and there's the cases where I simply don't know, and there's cases where it's a question that is more than just knowing. For example, there's Austro-Hungary. So let's say some of these questions that come up. There's commercial news as a headline to a specific section, and and there are commercial news telegrams. Are these completely the same thing? Is the difference between like the news and the telegrams different of media that has any influence on the content or not? Should we cluster them together? The same is when we call a section Austria or Austro-Hungary, Österreich-Ungarn in Hebrew Yiddish. And then there's what we call news in the land, news in our land, חדשות בארץ. This is the Hebrew form. There's also the חדשות בישראל, news in Israel. So this is another important thing to understand. News in Israel doesn't mean like today news in the land of Israel, in the country of Israel, but Jewish news in the people of Israel. So it's not a geographic category; it's a thematic category, and then there's the question of, okay, so when we have news in the land or news in our land, it means Poland basically, or it means Russia, or it means it depends on when when and where the newspaper was published. And we have miscellaneous news, and then you can ask yourself, are they more similar to the Jewish news thematically and stylistically, or are they more like the general international news, and so forth? So there are many questions that rise here, and we will not answer them all today. But the main, let's say, umbrella question here is, what are the main categories of the text? So this is more like theoretical, the theoretical impetus of this work. So here I find it very useful to go to the anthropologic dichotomy of the Emic and the Etic. The Emic and the Etic are terms that were introduced in the 50s in order to replace the dichotomy of the objective and subjective. As if, for example, in anthropology or language, there's the language of the subject, and then there's the objective language of analysis. This is was already understood in the 50s, that we should distance ourselves from this and find some methodological replacement of this dichotomy by using the Emic to coin the either language or meaning, or from the vantage point of the subject or object of research, and the Etic as the theoretical language of the researcher. And this dichotomy comes up when I'm thinking about, okay, now I'm going to classify these newspapers. How do I do that? Consuming newspapers, seeing newspapers today means I can expect the entertainment section, or the health section, or business section, and the politics and the world that I see here in the CNN. But that, of course, would be very different than other newspapers like the BBC, and obviously it changes a lot also in the time of internet. And so this is sort of the conceptual frame through which we consume these news, and we're given these news, and it is very foreign to the one of the 19th century. Even if they did have entertainment and sports and politics and travel in their newspapers, this is not how it would be organized, and this means a lot. So I'm using this Emic and Etic distinction, but I also want to add another player to the field, and that is the analytic, in the sense of the digital, the machine. So what I'm trying to see here, there's the Emic and the Etic. There's me, let's say, as a theoretician, or media scholar, or a linguist. It can be various views that I take as a researcher towards the data, and there's the Emic, but none of these 3 points are one. So the Emic can be the author and the editor, or you can even say that it's the zeitgeist that expresses itself in in the newspaper. The Etic can be the historian, the linguist, and even according to the school, I might be more interested in concepts or in the words or in the contents or in the authors, that might be in the literary value of what I'm reading or the history behind it. The same is true about the digital. We have various methods and tools that we use to look at the material and to do, let's say, distant reading of the material. And they can also be attuned to, let's say, stylometry has a better way of recognizing authors. Topic modeling is more about themes or maybe discourses. It's also controversial, and this is what we're trying to figure out. So how do I do that? The platform that I've been using is Orange. It is an open software that enables you to build your own workflow. You have various libraries here on the left, and each library has a lot of modules, like these little modules, which are, behind the screen. These are simple Python scripts that you're connecting together, and you create your workflow. It's really a wonderful platform. I was lucky to participate in this course given by the Data Science Research Center at Haifa. That's where I learned the tool, and I also want to do some stylometry with Stylo and I was discussing this with Machi. But being unable to work on such a large corpus right now, I use this, and I use stylometry-like parameters in order to try them. I think it will be more understood when we continue. So at the heart of the workflow, what we have is, first of all, the pre-processing of the text, which is tokenization. I use this regular expression to tokenize, so nothing too complex. You decide how many most frequent words you want to use, and then you make them into a bag of words. I'll show in a minute what that means, and into vectors that you have to measure the distances between these vectors in order to enable clustering. So how does it look? How does the bag of words look like? It's also this tabular form. Each of these lines or rows is a record that has the metadata fields, but also here the vector of the word frequencies. Okay, so the most frequent word is here is well, I can see everything, but let's say it's Asher appears 4 times, and Achmu appears 1, and this is like the raw data that I work with. And then you have to take all these vectors and measure the distances between them. I use the cosine distance here, and you get the result is a dendrogram, a word that I like because it's also very much easier than saying hierarchical. So, and I think you all know dendrograms from Stylo. They are wonderful tools, but they're also a little bit cumbersome to read. So Stylo has this nice thing where you can color the how do you say the names of the items. Orange has the coloring of the clusters, and you can color and number it. You can actually choose how many clusters you'll have. You can choose it manually, or you can set the distance threshold, and according to that, you'll have them colored. But in order to actually read it, you have to zoom in very strongly, and then you don't really get a good enough picture. So I mean, even from here, you can see that there's some patterns that you can recognize. You can see here that the clustering is good because it's like the same name repeating, and you can see this regularity, but actually you don't see enough. And for this, I use the second part of this workflow, which takes the clusters, and each cluster is now, let's say I use 3 clusters here, and now I have the 3 here, and I get a distribution table that shows me that this cluster has this headline. Let's say it's not the headline, it's a text that bears this headline, and this text that bear this headline, and they are clustered together. Okay, now I could do the same with years or the names of newspapers. So I could have it shown which years we have in the first cluster or which newspapers. But here we see the headlines. And then if I want to study it further, I get another distribution graph that shows me, for example, I select this column, and then I can see the distribution of the newspapers or the years. Of course, I can play around in many ways, but this is the way that we select our data. And finally, I can also add this module of the corpus viewer that lets me actually read the items. So I want to try a kind of experiment with you. I'll show you the graphs, but I actually cut here. This is the legend of the letters, and I cut it right here so you can't really see the legend. It's also not very convenient in Orange. It's a bit limited. But I want us to think maybe also to exercise this Emic Etic distance. Both this and in order to ask the questions that we have about the machine. Now, in this scenario, what I did is I chose the 1,000 most frequent words. Basically, I had to set a limit because otherwise it becomes too heavy on the computer. But this is a very high number, so we expect to get a lot of thematic words or meaningful words. So it's not like stylometry, it's more like keyword, maybe TF-IDF analysis or keyword analysis, and or maybe a little bit more similar to topic modeling. And we expect to get more of the content of the newspapers, so of the sections. And then I'll ask you, look at the behavior of clusters and try to think what are the headlines or the sections that are clustered in them. You see this one cluster here. The problem is that I have no idea how these colors are called. So let's say that this is purple or crimson purple, and this is olive green, and this is lime green. You see that, like, when you only cluster the corpus to 2, you get these 2 together. When you cluster to 3, you get this green one with some other types in a separate cluster, and all the rest are together. And then if you add the number of clusters, if you cluster it further, you can see these are still like separate and together. These are still together, and this colorful mix is separated. And I think always the last cluster is the messy one. So I add a few more, and what we see is mainly the stability of this. I mean, even when we have it in 3 clusters, they are still separate from the others, and I think also with the green you can see this. And let's try and let me know either in the chat, or I don't know if it's okay in the with a microphone. Just tell me what you think the biggest cluster is, and like what are these and what are these. You take a 19th century newspaper. what would be the sections that are most clearly clustered together?
If I would throw a guess, it could be news about incoming and outgoing people, or like important nobility, I would say.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
sometimes 19th century newspapers reported, all kinds of movement inside and outside the city. So it may be this one.
Okay. So the Kaiser came for a visit, and he was shown the place.
Yeah, and here we got in the chat news from our country, news from Israel.
Okay, so let's say the one who suggested this. Oh, sorry, just a moment. No, the one who suggested. I want to see the chat for a moment. Weather is interesting suggestion. So, Joachim, can you say, like, if we have news of the country, news from Israel, where would you see them? Do you think these are like these two colors or these?
It's difficult for me to say it in specific, but probably the first two columns, I suppose. I'm not sure though.
Okay. Okay. So in this picture, what you see is already. Sorry, this is the 1,000, and this is the 50 most frequent words. So I will talk about this difference, but we know that when we look at the 50 or even 100 most frequent words, then what we check is not the content but the style. And you see that even here you can see these two larger types together. We will see a comparison later. By the way, if you're still wondering if the newspaper itself is a parameter, then you can see that it's pretty much like, some of these clusters are from a specific newspaper, but others are pretty much evenly distributed. I mean, they're not even because the number of words that we have from each newspaper is not even, but relatively distributed. Okay, so now I will start telling you what I found. The first cluster is international news. So I think it's not about like the visits or mobility but a lot about, yes, this ruler went to there and things that happen in the parliament, and a lot about England. I was surprised to see how much Gladstone was the star of the newspaper, and so this is international news and news in the land. So in this case, mostly local news, Austro-Hungary news, actually, but maybe specifically Galicia in particular times are also here, and telegrams. There's some international news here, but they are clustered with other genres, and by the way, I keep saying either genres or categories or discourses or topics, and I don't really know which one it is. I mean, this is part of what I'm trying to figure out, if there's any difference between the kinds of categories that I'm revealing here. So if we look at the smaller clusters, what we see is that they're homogenic, right? There's this one cluster is one section, one type of section, and the same with this and this. And these are, so I call them unique headlines clusters, and they are the very formulaic types. So we have these formulaic parts of, for example, questions and answer. To Mr. This from the city of Y, the answer is very short. To Mr. A from the city of B, the answer is this and that. And the same for all agencies, Mr. This and this in the city of X. So these are very formulaic section, and this is why they are clustered together, and they'll be very similar among them. And they can also be too similar. So for example, the title page is this, you can see this cluster, you see it's very low, it's very like close together. And it was actually there by mistake when I didn't see that it was the title page. When I worked on it, and I worked on it on Hebrew, and it has this literary headline that was given to it, something like I'm telling Jacob the something. So I didn't realize this was actually the subtitle of a newspaper. So it doesn't have any content except the subtitle, and this clustering actually revealed that something is not logical here. It's too close together, and indeed that was the title pages. The green and the other ones are very make a lot of sense as a cluster. These are the commercial news and commercial news telegrams. So if I was wondering before, now I know there's no essential difference between them. They are similar in the sense of in the eyes of the computer, they are similar. And they are clustered together with these exchange rates, advertisement, publisher notices, which usually say something about the price of the newspaper and the frequency. So it's a lot of numbers. And then we have this second cluster, which also has some international news, but the Israel news would be here and the miscellaneous news would be here. So we see that they are closer together than what we had here. The feuilleton and popular science, that was extremely important at the time. At least in one of the newspapers, it was part of the enlightenment of bringing science, modern science, to the Jewish community. And some telegrams as well. Okay, so the clustering is not completely perfect, but it's there. And the popular science and miscellaneous news really feature in this cluster. And then we have this other cluster, which has the more local news. Local, not local in the sense of city, but we have the sections on Germany, the sections of Russia, the section on Austro-Hungary, and they're in a different cluster. And this is very bewildering for me, because basically international news is one title that is normally also divided into subsections, which I don't have in the data, this subdivision of exactly this: Russia, Germany, Austro-Hungary. So there's something very strong that separates those sections that are published separately than the sections that are published all in one international news package. So this is something I still have to figure out. And then there's the messy, I don't know why I painted it in bold, the messy cluster, which I guess is really about things that are less dissimilar. So they're not, they don't really have any similarity between them, but they are packed together. And it is interesting that there are these areas that appear here and areas appear here, and they are different. So there's something different about the kind of writing that you get on Ashkenaz, for example, which is just another word for Germany, but it's still different. So this is something that requires more exploring, and also knowing a little bit about the scholarship on this newspaper, on these newspapers, and knowing them before you can really get the results. I just want to maybe highlight the more the results that would be more interesting for us. How are we doing the time? Ooh, I'm pretty much finished, right?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically these are provisional results. So the first interesting thing is that I would expect telegrams and the international news essays, which are very, usually take over several pages, to be very different in style, and this is not the case. So this is one very interesting finding I can talk on. And the second one is that although there is a difference between the, let's say, stylistic approach of using the most frequent words and the more content related approach, they are still, I actually didn't notice it, but didn't mention it, but there's also, I also used IDF, so inverted document frequency, in order to strengthen the unique letter, the unique words in these results. And so this is also, the difference is much smaller than I would expect. So, and you can explain this either by, that there's simply a conformity of form and of style and content. Or you can say that this is a limitation of the Hebrew here that is not segmented. So you actually have very few non-significant, let's say, function words when you analyze the language. Or maybe newspaper language is specifically problematic for stylometry because you don't use that many function words as you do in literary language. I think with that I'll finish. So I have some links. If you want, I can paste them in the chat, and thank you very much.